but it can easily be the best relationship you'll ever have in your life, and in fact I think it can be the worst too. And you know, sometimes you get unlucky and your child is sick mentally or physically and things fall apart and it's not your fault, and sometimes it is your fault, but it's a real gift, and you have to play this game of protection and encouragement, right? Protection and encouragement, and get that dynamic right, and then you help someone develop into something that's, well, exactly this, that can take on the trouble of the world forthrightly, and man, that's what you want. That'll make it worthwhile, that's for sure. Now let's see, I got to figure out where I want to go next. Well, I've talked about the dragon fight, so I won't do that. Oh yes, we might as well look at some of we'll look at the same thing on the patriarchal side of the equation. So it's the great father and the great mother that emerge out of chaos, let's say that. You can think about that over the evolutionary time span too, because it's the fundamental differentiation of life into two sexes, you know, the fundamental differentiation of being into two sexes that interact creatively to produce new being. It's a very, very deep motif. And so the dragon of chaos differentiates itself into the great father, and that's God the Father. That's an image there, and you see he's sitting in front of the sun, and the sun is behind him, and the sun is the thing that comes up out of the darkness in the morning and then shines the light on everything with which we can see, and then collapses again into the darkness at night, right? And so at night it fights its battle with the forces of darkness and chaos and emerges triumphant in the morning. And that's why we have solar gods, because the highest deity is assimilated to the dominant phenomena in the sky. And well, and no wonder, because the sun is also what gives life and that provides light and that does send the darkness away. And to notice that there's something symbolically useful in that you can also apply to the ideal person is another act of conceptual metaphoric genius. And so behind God the Father is the Son, S-O-N, Son. And you see he's ruling over a walled city here, and you could think about God the Father here as the spirit of the walled city. That's a good way of thinking about it. And so, what does that spirit mean? Well, forget about the supernatural element of this, or the transcendent element of it even. How do you represent society? Okay, you've got your walled city. Okay, why is it walled? That's the fundamental structure of a city. Why is it walled? Well, because you have to have a border between what's yours and what isn't yours, or a border between your territory and outside world, right? Otherwise it's not delineated and defined. So the first thing is it's something that's walled off. It's a defined space. Inside that, there's a dominance hierarchy. It's a masculine dominance hierarchy, because like chimps, our fundamental dominance hierarchy is masculine. Okay, so the dominance hierarchy is what's the same across all the men. And then it's more than that. It's what's the same across all men insofar as they found their position in the dominance hierarchy, insofar as they're supporting it, insofar as they're expanding it, and insofar as they're trying to strive up it. So it's averaged across that, but then it's more than that, because it's not just the men that live now, it's also the men that used to live and the men that will live. And you think, what are you relating to when you relate to other people? Well, in part you're relating to the spirit of the men that will soon live, and that's what a contract is, right? You make a contract with the potential society of the future. It's embodied as a spirit, and so you act appropriately in relationship to the patriarchal spirit, because if you act in accordance with that structure, then you can extend your contractual relationship with other people across time. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant conceptualization. That's independent of any supernatural or transcendent reality. I'm not saying it exists in necessary opposition to such things. I'm just saying that you don't have to introduce the idea of such things into the conceptualization in order to understand the symbolism. Now, I think it's more complicated than that, because if you think about this thing as a spirit is an essential pattern of personality, let's call it that. To the degree that you're a well-civilized representative of the social world, you are actually inhabited by that spirit. And so what should happen as you mature is that as you become older, you should become God the Father. That's what you're aiming at. You want to embody that central spirit that characterizes the civilization, and that spirit's very complex, and that's why you often see it in relationship with the representation of God the Son, because the masculine spirit isn't, the spirit in general, the spirit of civilization, isn't exhausted by its patriarchal representation. That's the dogmatic form, like Osiris, right? It's only the structure. That has to be allied with the thing that keeps the structure alive. So you want to be both of those things at the same time. The embodiment of the civilization and the force that transforms it and moves it forward. And that's what you're supposed to be being taught. That's what university is for. Well, that's what it used to be for. Now it's mostly there to produce politically obsessed idiots. Oh, anyways, sorry about that, but it gets very frustrating. So, all right, so that you get the picture. That's what that represents. That's what it's trying. That's an idea that's been trying to emerge in the human imagination since the beginning of time. And it's not a trivial idea. It's an unbelievably profound idea, and it differentiates too. And this is what makes it complicated. What kind of relationship do you have with your father, your real father? It's often ambivalent, right? Because there's an element of him that encouraged you, hopefully, because without the encouragement of your father, man, the world is a dismal place. It's very difficult to be a courageous person unless you have your father in body and spirit behind you. It's very demoralizing. Like, it really kills people not to have their mother. They just don't recover from that. And I think people can recover from a fragmented father relationship, but it's the next worst thing. You know, because if your father rejects you or doesn't form a relationship with you, it's as if the spirit of civilization has left you outside the walls as of little worth. It's very difficult for people to recover from that. So the father should be an encouraging force, but can be a tyrannical and crushing force. And so that's a very difficult thing to get right, partly because if you're my son, then I should impose the highest standards of behavior on you. And I should always be judging what you're doing. I should be judging it with the aim of making the best in you come forward. But getting that balance exactly right is very difficult. And so it's easy for a father to swing too much into judgment, let's say. And of course mothers can play this role too. To swing too far into the domain of judgment and to be too harsh. And to the degree that the father has his own pathologies, he's going to do that imperfectly. You know, he might be someone who's the father who devours his son because he's jealous of the new possibility, the new potential, the struggle for attention and love from the mother or from the other children in the family. There's all sorts of things that can go terribly wrong. So that's the father as wise king, and that's another symbol that's been lost, I would say, to a massive degree in modern universities, because all we're taught is to tear that down. And to not even notice that it manifests itself everywhere, especially in the universities, which are like they're as close to an ideal environment as human beings have ever been able to create. It's as simple as that. And if you can't be grateful for the structure of the university with all its imperfections, then you're completely blind to this element of the archetype. And that's the opposite of it. That's the son that devours, the king that devours his own son. That's a tyrant. You know, that's like the mother who's too overprotective. It's the male version of that. And the mother that's too overprotective says, I'll never let anything happen to you. It's like, well, maybe you actually want to have something happen to you. You know, it's a bit of an all-inclusive statement. It's like, no, I'm going to make you strong so any number of things can happen to you. And when you need some care, I'll be there. But otherwise, like out into the world with you. That's the right attitude. And for the father, it's like, get your bloody act together. But I'm on your side. It's not because I want to destroy you or demean you or push you down in the dominance hierarchy, but because I want the best in you to emerge. And so you need standards. It's like, what are you doing wasting your life? There's way more than that to you. Get your act together and bring it out. And that's a message that people really want to hear if they have any sense at all. And generally they do want to hear it. So, you know, I've been talking to a lot of people recently, as perhaps you know, and I was talking to one of the leaders of the Conservatives this morning, and they're asking me about, the person was asking me about Bill C-16, but more specifically about talking to young people, because the Conservative leadership struggle is going on right now. I've been talking to a bunch of them, and I said, well look, one of the things you could do for young people that no one's doing is to talk to them about responsibility. Because everyone talks to young people about rights. It's like, we need our rights. It's like, oh God, how many rights do you need? You know, really, like you have more privileges than any people who've ever lived anywhere. Well, it's so dull to hear that. It's so dull, it's so pathetic, and what would you call it? It's so demeaning that you have to be protected and have your rights. It's like I said, there's a huge marketplace for responsibility. That's what you want to talk to young people about. It's like, get your act together and do something worthwhile with your life. For the first time in my entire adult life, the conservatives actually have something to sell young people, right? They can sell them responsibility. It's like, well, why? Because that's where life has meaning with responsibility. The more responsibility you take on, the more meaning your life has. And the higher degree of responsibility that you agree voluntarily to try to bear, the richer your life will be. And no one's ever told that, and it's the case. You know, it's like you have 4 kids, say. Well, that's plenty of responsibility. You're going to have meaning. It's going to be rough, you know, because it's complicated. You have a complicated job, and you try to help the careers of the people around you. You try to solve tough problems and aid suffering and do all of that. It's like, it's weight, it's responsibility, but there's glory in it. There's real glory in it. There's deep meaning in it. And young people are starving for that because no one ever tells them that. It's like, you're way more than you think, man. Stand up, do something difficult. Do something difficult and heroic, right? Burst out of your bonds. It's like, that's a good message. It's a necessary message, because we have to be more than we are, because if we aren't, we're not going to survive. Well, that's the sun-devouring father. That's a painting by Medina of Satan. It's a pretty horrifying one. And that's Captain Hook. I really like the figure of Captain Hook. Some of these popular mythological stories, myth-based fairy tales, modern fairy tales, have got things really right. Captain Hook, well, he's a pirate. So, I think I told you that in the Google engineers' investigations of female sexual fantasies, the pirate played a large role. Werewolf, vampire, pirate, surgeon, billionaire. Incredibly comical. Well, pirate, you know, captain of the high seas and someone willing to break rules. There's a romance in that figure. Well, so the idea of the great father as the pirate is a good one. Well, Hook is kind of a pathetic pirate, and of course pirates are precisely that, because they're also crooked. And so what makes him pathetic? Well, it isn't because he's got a hook precisely, because maybe that's just a sign of adventure. It's because he's being chased by a crocodile with a clock in its stomach. Well, that's the dragon of chaos, right? That's time. Tick, tick, tick. Your life is going to end. It's already got a piece of you, and it's coming for the rest. And so Hook is terrified of that. He's terrified into resentment and evil, roughly speaking. It's why he can prey on other people. And so that's the father in the Peter Pan story out in Neverland, which is the archetypal domain. Captain Hook's the father. Well, why would Peter Pan want to grow up to be Captain Hook? Well, he doesn't. And so he stays Pan. Pan means everything, right? Like pantheism. He stays everything. He's this divine child. He never wants to grow up. Well, why would you sacrifice the potential of youth to become nothing but a death-obsessed tyrant? Well, that's the story in Peter Pan. And of course, Wendy's in this story, and so is Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell is the imagined feminine. She doesn't even exist. She's just this perfect little thing that's always around whenever Peter Pan needs her. But the problem with Tinkerbell is that she's a fairy and fairies don't exist. He has Wendy there. She's a real girl. She grows up and actually marries someone. Peter Pan stays king of the Lost Boys forever. And you know, maybe it's better to be king of the Lost Boys than not to be king at all, but maybe not too. King of the damned is not exactly something to, it's not a dominance hierarchy to strive for dominating. So that's the Peter Pan story. And it's the right story for the modern age, that's for sure. So that's a negative element of the Great Father. Here's a positive element of the Great Father. These are both, this is a representation of Moses receiving the rules for living from God on high. Well, we talked about that already, you know. And I see that, that's a story of the revelation of structure. that's the story of mankind. We're acting out a moral structure. Well, what is it?